Hello, Lions fans everywhere. This is another edition of Believe in Lions. It is brought to you by FanDuel. I'm Trevor Thompson. The other two gentlemen that you see on the screen, former Lions All-Pro Glover Quin, the star of the show, and the Lions insider and senior writer on Lions.com, Tim Twentyman, joins us here for an inside peek of what's going on in Lions free agency so far. And Tim, Glover and I had an opportunity to go over some of this last week. A lot of comings and goings, more goings than comings, and Glover had at it last week with me. I know how he feels, but let him start off tonight telling you what he feels and maybe pick your brain as we kick off tonight's edition of Believe in Lions. GQ, it's all you. What do you got for Tim?
Tim, give me some inside scoop, man. What what is the what is what is the plan? What is I know we've paid a lot of our guys. But we've gotten rid of a lot of our glue guys. David Montgomery, Alex Anzalone, like Khalif Raymond. Those are the glue guys of the team. How are they trying to rebuild that?
Well, it's some of the young guys have to step up, Glove. You can have glue guys, and those guys can be your guys, like a Khalif, like an Alex that you talked about. But at some point, those guys get to a salary point when you've got other stars and you've got other young guys that you mentioned that they've got to pay, and they have paid. And I think what the Lions are looking at is, look, we've got 4, 5, 6 all-pro caliber players on this team that are all 26 years or younger. And so some of them have already been paid. Some of them are going to get paid. And that's the foundation. That's the core. That's what Brad Holmes talked about afterward. He said, look, I'm going to build around the core guys. And so when you're going to do that and you identify those guys, the Amon-Ra St. Brown's, Penei Sewell, Jack Campbell, Brian Branch, Jahmyr Gibbs, who's going to come due, Jack Campbell's going to come due, Sam Laporte is going to come due. All that money's coming due. And so now you're looking at ways to free up some of that money. And what you say is, look, some other guys have to step up and be those glue guys. Some guys are going to have to step up into roles. Malcolm Rodriguez, who has started 25 games in this year, he's going to have to step in and play that will spot and try to take over and be one of those glue guys. It's your time now, young guy. You've been in the league long enough. Now you have to step into that role, a lot like Alex wasn't a starter, wasn't a premier player in this league right away. If you remember his time in New Orleans, was a guy like Malcolm, a spot starter, and then he got his opportunity here in Detroit, and then he became what he became. At some point, Glove, you need young guys to step into those spots and be those kind of guys. Isaac Tesla now has to be your third guy for Khalif Raymond, right? He's got to give you something at just some point. You've been in this league and you've seen some young guys come through. I think Darius Slay is probably a great example when you were here, right? There were some veteran guys in front of Darius. And then it became a point where, look, Darius, you're a second round pick. You got to be that guy. And then you get an opportunity and he becomes that guy. And I just think, Glove, this team is at that point where they need some of those young guys now to step into those roles, take big steps forward, and be those new glue pieces for the next, transition of this football team. And I just think that's the philosophy. They've got their core pieces. They've identified who they are. They're going to put the money toward that. And now it's about finding, veterans that can step in and contribute and young guys to step up and fill roles.
Man, it seemed like all of their young guys are like big money guys. When I think about it, you think about the guys that aren't paid. Terrion Arnold, he's a first round cornerback. Brian Branch, he's not paid. Jahmyr Gibbs, those guys. Those not really your glue guys. Those are your superstars.
Right.
In a sense. I just don't know how they can pay everybody.
I think some of the mechanisms are going to have to start to be in place, and look, Brad has always been a general manager that has looked out for his guys, I think, for the most part, and tried to take care of his guys, right? Draft, develop, and pay. And that's been the philosophy. But, you've got mechanisms in place as a team. You've got the franchise tag. You've got the transition tag. Look, they haven't used those things in a long, long time, in a decade. And I think this roster's just at a point now, and look, I know Globe players hate those kind of things, but at some point, your roster's now to a point, and you've got so many good young players that have been paid or you have to pay, that the transition tag and the franchise tag, I think we're going to start to see those mechanisms come in place here the next couple off seasons.
So, Tim, you talk about the money being spent right now, and that's all well and good, but you still have to bring players on because you expect to be a competitive team. Right now, I'm looking at FanDuel. The Lions are the odds-on favorite on FanDuel, plus 160 to win the NFC North. So the expectation is still going to be there. So you have to bring guys in order to keep this thing at a certain level. So we saw Jared Goff give some money back, rework his contract in order to make some things happen. Do you see anybody else doing the same thing, restructuring the contract, freeing up a little money so they can pursue the type of guys they're going to need to maintain that standard?
There's still an opportunity. I think with Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown are probably the two that could get done if Brad decides that there's an opportunity and he needs the money. I think they have the money available right now with what Jared did to do what they already did in free agency, maybe get two more guys and then take care of the cap. Or take care of the draft, excuse me. I think they're still going to need some money for the regular season, especially when injuries hit. So I could see potentially one more of those things getting done. But if not, they have the money right now that they need to get themselves through the season. But I still think they need to add, a piece or two in free agency. I think probably defensive end, we can probably both agree that there needs to be an addition there. Right now, you've got Hutch and you've got Ahmed Hassanin. Those are your two edge rushers at this point. I think you look at some guys out there, AJ Epineza, Cam Jordan, obviously, who Dan Campbell's familiar with. There's a Joey Bosa out there, and I don't know if they have the money, for a Cam or a Joey. If they get to a point where maybe something could fall into place there, that I think is when maybe you could try to free up some more money. But I think they're still going to get an edge rusher. And then this draft is probably the deepest edge rushing draft I've seen in a decade. I think you're going to get guys in this draft into the fourth round that are going to be able to help people. You talk to any of the draft analysts out there, and they say edge rusher and receiver is so deep in this draft. And so for a Lions fan, you have to feel pretty good. You've got obviously the first, the second, and 2 fourths. I think if they get a veteran guy like a Cam Jordan or somebody else in here, and then you draft a guy, all of a sudden that position feels a little bit better. And I think as a whole, you feel pretty good about some of the depth that they've added in free agency, but they still obviously have to do that piece on the edge of their defensive line.
Depth in free agency. I went over this with Glover last week. A couple of guys have been added since then, but Teddy Bridgewater, Larry Borum, you got Cade Mays at center, Tyler Conklin recently signed, Isaiah Pacheco, Roger McCreary recently, Juice Scruggs moves on and moved here in the trade, but just those kinds of additions. Of all of those, which do you think is most important? And those don't sound like the types of names that replace the guys that left. So Glover and I talked about this, taking steps back. How do you, again, those guys, how are they help moving you forward?
Yeah, I think Cade Mays is the one that jumps out to me. I think that's where you took a step forward. I think when you look at him and his age and his production versus what you got from Graham Glasgow last year, I think that's an obvious, step forward. Obviously, the team thought so too with a 3-year contract for him. Hasn't allowed a sack in 2 years. I think he's still an ascending player. I think that one probably helps you out immediately. And then when you look at some of the other guys, I mean, you mentioned Borum, for example. There's a guy that, do you feel great if he's your right tackle? I think he can step in, and he's done that. He's played right and left tackle. Do you feel better about that, guys, if he's your swing tackle? Is he an upgrade over Dan Skipper? And look, I love Dan Skipper. I think he's going to do a great job on that coaching staff. But I think when you look at just the age, athletic ability, and stuff like that, well, he steps in and he's your swing tackle and spot starter. You feel really good about that. And so let's say you go get a tackle at 17, or you get one in the second round that you really feel good about. Now you've got a young tackle that you like, that you think you can start. And then you've got a Borum, a guy who can be your swing tackle and step in and start. Are you better off than you were before? I think that's an argument, and a fair one. And so, some of these guys, you look at Conklin. Conklin caught at least 50 passes in 21, 22, 23, 24, went into a bad situation with the Chargers. But if you're talking about a second, third tight end, that's some production there. I mean, that's a guy who just recently, 4 straight years, had at least 50 catches. If he's your number 3 tight end, Do you feel good about that situation? So I just think with where this team has been, where the injuries are, and we talked about it earlier, they've got their guys, their core pieces they're building around. Now it's about building that depth. When you lose a Laporta, when you lose a Brock Wright, and you're down to the third, fourth, fifth tight end at the end of the year in really important games, having a guy like Conklin, who's got a history of catching 50, 60 balls as your number 3 tight end, you feel better about that. So I think those are the moves, and that's the way you have to look at free agency is filling some of that depth. Everybody wants star players, right? And everybody wants that top free agent, that big money guy. I want to ask you both a question. How many teams in this league have 2 franchise caliber, really high paid edge guys? 2 of them. You know, like if the Lions were to have a Hutchinson and Max Crosby, how many teams have that?
Not the way you
None.
build it. Yeah, it's not the way you
None,
build
right?
it.
You've got one guy, right? And you try to fill that other spot with a young guy. If he steps in, he's great, and you have that tandem that's awesome. A second tier free agent guy. You can't pay 2 edges in this league. It's just that's how the salary cap goes, especially when you have a quarterback who's got a 60 million plus, cap hit. And so I just think it's those things. They're building this through their core, and they're trying to get those pieces to build that depth of where if injuries happen, which has been the story of the last 2 seasons, even when they were 15-2, they lost that Washington game because they got decimated by injury. They were playing guys off the street. So you bring in these free agents that are your number 2, your number 3 guy. And if you're in that situation again, boy, you feel pretty good about that guy stepping in. I think that's the trajectory that Brad Holmes took in free agency is really filling the depth, knowing that his core guys, his big money guys, they're already on this roster. He doesn't need to go get them somewhere else. That's his feeling, at least.
I just like you said, it just seems to me we put so much into those top guys, and when they go down, we're all scratching our heads like, where is the production going to come from? I saw it last year when I went to training camp last year. I got back on the podcast and I was like, man, I liked the starters, from the secondary. They had Kirby out there and Brian and Terrion and DJ, and I was like, but after those guys, I'm a little worried about the depth in the secondary.
Yeah, and that's why a guy like Ezen, helps. Christian Ezen Jr. He's played safety, he's played nickel. McCreary obviously has had some success, has played a lot of nickel. So those are veteran guys again, not flashy names, right? Not your top tier free agency guys that you look at the list on NFL.com and the top 25, and you're always a Lions fan. And you're like, well, I want him and him and him. But the money's not there to do that unless they would have done all those deals and really mortgaged the future. And Brad Holmes isn't about to do that with so many young stars under the age of 27 and 26 on this team. He thinks they can be good for a long time. I tend to agree with him. And they have to build up that depth that you talk about, Glover. So when guys go down, now you've got an Izzy and you've got a McCreary. You've got some guys that have stepped into and played football in this league. And it's about improving the depth. And so I think they've got some proven guys. I think safety is still maybe an area you can look at the draft, especially that I could see them adding a young guy. I do like what Thomas Harper kind of stepped in and I thought did some pretty good things. We still have to see Dan Jackson, their draft pick from last year, who was hurt in training camp. But when you got Kirby and Brian and Izzian, who's played some good football in this league, you add one more guy, you start to feel better about the depth. But look, Glove, and you both know. I mean, there's always going to be a few spots where you're kind of deficient, and that you can't do as much as you want to do right now. I think that's along the defensive line, and they've got some work to do there. But I thought they've done a nice job. I think Pacheco, fits that kind of style that they want to do. Physical, right? Still hungry. A guy like David, when he came over here, he was, his team didn't want him. He felt shaded a little bit. Now he's out to prove something and be that, change of pace guy. I like him. It's those kind of pieces that they've added, and Brad's hoping he added enough depth to really make this football team better in the long run when they do suffer some injuries.
See, the Pacheco one, I just wonder how it's going to play out, because I feel like Gibbs and Montgomery, they were different players, and I don't feel like David Montgomery ever tried to be like Jahmyr Gibbs, and I don't feel like Jahmyr Gibbs ever tried to be like David Montgomery. They were true Sonic and Knuckles in a sense. But I can see Pacheco trying to play like Jahmyr because I feel like he's one of those type of backs. I don't feel like he's a bigger power guy like a David Montgomery who can just be happy in his lane. I feel like watching Jahmyr closely at practice, watching him closer on film and things like that, I feel like that could probably persuade the way he plays, and they could probably they'll probably be the same guy. So I still feel like they need that. Like, I don't feel like Pacheco is a change of pace. He's the same pace as Jahmyr, or is trying to be. He's probably not as fast, but he's trying to be.
Yeah, he's certainly not as fast, but I'd say this just from watching them. I think he brings a more physical brand of football. I think he'll drop his pads and he doesn't mind delivering a hit. Now, Jahmyr doesn't either, but that's not his game. I think there's a little more power to his game than maybe he gets credit for. But is he David Montgomery? No. Obviously not. But I think we're also going to see Jahmyr Gibbs really break out this year. I think you saw it coming last year when the split was 60-40, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's 70-30 this year. I think they expect Jahmyr Gibbs with a better offensive line in front of him to have a breakout year, and they expect him to be, offensive player of the year type of a player. And Pacheco knows that. I mean, I'm pretty sure they were pretty honest with Pacheco when he got here, saying, look, Gibbs is our guy. And even Pacheco said he admired Gibbs' game. If you don't know that Jahmyr Gibbs, Christian McCaffrey, and Bijan Robinson are the guys in this league now, then you're not paying attention. And so I think he knows the situation he's coming to. I think the Lions were very honest with him. And I think he looks at this as a reclamation project a little bit and a chance maybe to play with a chip on his shoulder, and whatever opportunities he does get, I think like David Montgomery got when he first got here, I think he's looking to take advantage of those. And I think he's going to play the role that the Lions ask him to. And I think that was spelled out to him before he got here.
One of the things that you brought up last week too, GQ, was just the difference in carries and the number of touches that you get throughout a game, and how that might affect a Jahmyr Gibbs. And running between the tackles really isn't his game, how much it might wear him down over the course of a season to take more carries. Just wondering where you sit on that, Tim, and if Glover, if you want to expand on that thought again.
Well, no,
Yeah,
I would just. Oh, you
go
got
ahead.
it.
No,
Tim.
go ahead, Glove. Go ahead, Glove.
No, I was just saying, like, when you're splitting things with someone, you're not getting all of it. I mean, we saw him take on a heavier load last year, but now that you gotten rid of David Montgomery, you're basically telling him we're giving you the keys. Now we got you a backup, driver, but for the most part, you got the keys. And if we're going on the long road trip, you you got the keys. You know what I'm saying? So you can't get tired. Not for very long.
No, and it's a good point. But, I look back to the end of, I think it was the 2024 season, right? Remember when David hurt his knee those last 4 or 5 games of the year? I think it was. And Trev, I don't know if you're sitting right by a computer and have those stats available at Jahmyr Gibbs at the end of the 2024 season, but I'm pretty sure that he went 4 or 5 games straight there with at least 20 to 25 carries, might have gotten 30 in a game. I could be wrong. It could be right under, but I think it was that stretch when he had 20, 25 carries every single game. And I think he rushed for at least 100 yards in all those games. I think it was close to 700 yards in 5 games when he had to carry the load there at the end of the season. And that was when the first time that I thought, okay, now is that a whole season like you're talking about, Glove? It's not, that's a pretty small sample size there. But that was, a consistent every day. You're going to be the man, teams are going to scheme against you knowing you're going to be the man, and had that kind of success. And I just think, the drop off that we saw with him last year in some of those scenarios was just the quality of the play he got up front in front of him. I think we can all agree with that. Once Frank left and Taylor was dealing with something, it just wasn't the same offensive line. And so if they can fix some of that part, I have a lot of confidence from what Jahmyr showed me at the end of 2024 to think that he can go into this season and be a 20, 25 carry guy. And maybe there's some other weeks where that's not the case, and you give Pacheco a little little bit more, or you're more pass oriented. But and I think Jahmyr can handle that load. He's got those young legs, guys. You guys know about that. We haven't seen those in a while, but he's got those young legs, and he can run away from people. He doesn't take a lot of big hits, and so I think he's going to be able to handle what the Lions have in store for him this year.
Yeah, I don't need to dig into it. I've got it here, but not to quibble. The point you're making is right, Tim, and the guy is looking for more. He's still young too. Let's not forget about that. He's got a lot of runway ahead of him as far as that goes. Tim, I just want to shift gears a little bit and ask you about some guys that are still left unsigned and what you think may happen with them. A guy like Marcus Davenport, Avonte Maddox, Tristan Colon, DJ Reader, guys like that who have experience looking the part of the program, maybe can extend some of the depth you've been talking about. What are your thoughts on any of those guys coming back and where any of that stands?
Yeah, I think the Marcus Davenport ship has probably sailed at this point. Just with, and look, it's not all his fault. Some of that was injuries too, but I just think they're looking to get a little bit more younger, a little bit more reliable in that spot. Of those names, I think Avonte Maddox is a guy that I really thought played well last year. A guy that can play some corner for you, that can play some safety. Glover knows how hard that is to try to do both. That's how he started and finished his career. And so he's got some versatility to his game. He's won a Super Bowl in this league. He knows what winning is. And I thought he stepped in and did a pretty good job when they needed to at the end of the season. I'm curious what Glove thinks about Avonte and maybe his fit here, because I thought that was a good one for a number 3, number 4 backup cornerback safety to have that kind of versatility and experience. I thought that was pretty important last year, Glove.
Yeah, I thought Avonte played well. I mean, I liked it when he was in Philly, and then for him to come over in Detroit and some of the things he did. I mean, I thought he was fine. And like you say, anytime you can have that guy that can play corner, play safety, most of the time he can kick in and play the nickel as well. I mean, those guys are invaluable because you're getting special teams from that guy as well. I mean, they're actually taking up 4 spots for you on game day roster. So anytime you can get those guys that can play it and play it at a high level, and like you say, he got Super Bowl experience. He's been around it. He's done it. So yeah, I definitely think he's definitely a guy that if they can bring him back, it would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, and I think DJ Reader is maybe a guy that's probably a second, third wave of free agency type guy, just where he is in his career, and he's going to be, he's really going to take his time and make sure he makes the right move at this point. I know he said publicly he would like to come back here. I think the Lions want Tyleik Williams to kind of step into that role. That's why they drafted him in the first round, and it's kind of like that that transition of the roster that we talked about earlier, right? Some of those young guys have to step in and fill some of those roles. And some guys it's earlier than others when you're a first round pick. Well, guess what? In this league, it doesn't wait for anybody, and you've got to step in and fill those roles. And so with Levi Onwuzurike coming back, I know that Lions fans might roll their eyes a little bit, but if you go back to 2024 with Levi, he was second on this team in quarterback pressures. I thought he played great on a contract year. Unfortunately, had the ACL in the offseason, and he didn't play last year. But if he can come back to being anything like 2024 Levi Onwuzurike again on a contract year, then I like where they're at is if he's your number 3, defensive tackle, with Aleem McNeil in there. But I think there's a spot for DJ Reader. I think the price has got to be right because they're looking for some of those young guys, I think, especially Tyleik, to kind of step into a bigger role next to Aleem. And obviously Aleem with his contract and his potential is going to have a big role. So I think those are going to be your 2 defensive tackles. Would DJ Reed come back and want to have a lesser role? I think that's part of the equation too, that he's got to kind of go through in his free agency process. So we'll have to see on that. But of that list that you talked about, I think Avonte Maddox is a guy for me in that second, maybe third wave of free agency, depending on what kind of opportunities, he has at other places. I think would be a great guy to come back on, a 1-year deal and be that depth that Glover talked about in the secondary.
Glover, you have a thought here about anything?
Well, I kind of want to. I kind of want to change the subject. We talked a lot about the players.
Fire away.
We talked a lot about the players, and rightfully so. But I want to know kind of what's the feel about like with Dan and with Brad. I mean, we've had sayings that those guys, might. It's not winter. I mean, it's still cold out there, so. I mean, we need seat warmers and hand warmers and all those things. But, when you look at, for me, when I look at the Lions over the last few years, they started out slow with Dan, obviously, and then boom, they shoot to the top, NFC Championship game, come back the next season, #1 seed, but you get bounced, first home game, and then you come back last year, you don't even make the playoffs. It's kind of like we started here, and then we went up, and now it's kind of like we're slowly. Do those guys feel any pressure like on this season? Like, we are. Do they feel the security to say, hey, we can take our time to continue to like rebuild and this and that? Or is it like kind of like some urgency, like, hey guys, we could be, on the hot seat?
Yeah, no, I think there's some urgency, and I wouldn't use the term rebuild. I would say retool. Because you're not, you've got your foundation, you've got your core pieces. You're not building, you're retooling around those guys like we talked about earlier. So yeah, they were this, and they've got to get to this real quick. And I think both those guys know that, and I think there is pressure. You talked to both those guys after the season, and we asked them what grade they'd give themselves. They said an F. They said it was a fail. It wasn't good enough. Um, and you talked about it. Look, Dan's been here since 2021. So that's 5 years, 2 playoff appearances. You've got to get back to competing for the NFC North. You've got to get back to being a playoff team. You can't go consecutive years once you've reached the pinnacle that you talked about, Glover, in 23 and 24. You can't do this anymore. You can have some blips in the radar with injuries and some of the things that you deal with, but it's got to be this or this. From where the point, from just the point that this football team is at, and some of the young core stars that they have, they view this as an ascending football team, and they have to do, a good job putting pieces around those guys to make sure that they're back competing for the NFC North and they're back in the playoffs, because that's the standard now. And you go a certain number of years under that standard, we all know what happens in this league. And so I don't think there's external pressure. I don't think there's pressure from ownership. I don't think anything like that. I think they've done enough, certainly, to be able to kind of bounce back from last year. But I think there's internal pressure from both those guys that know what the expectation is, what this fan base expects. They were around in 23 and 24 when this thing was rejuvenated and what Ford Field was like. And they understand that. And this is a demanding city that they both live and work in. They certainly understand that too. And so I think there's more internal pressure to live up to the fans and the expectation that they've built than anything else.
I just want to touch on one thing, and I want to get back to the FanDuel odds with you on this one, because I brought this up to last week to Glover, Tim, and I just wondering your thoughts. Okay, so in the NFC North, the Lions are the odds-on favorite to win the division. The Packers are second at plus 200. But then you go to the NFC, and the Packers are way ahead of the Lions, and they're way ahead of the Lions in Super Bowl odds as well. How do you think the division stacks up, and why do you think overall the odds makers think the Packers are a better bet than the Lions, but not in their own division?
Yeah, that's kind of
where you land on that.
Yeah, that's really odd, especially when you consider the Lions are playing a last place schedule this year. I mean, you look at some of the things that they avoided, like the NFC West, I mean, you get the Arizona instead of those monsters, those are the other 3-headed monsters out there. You play a last place schedule, and I think the Lions are going to benefit from that. I find that a little strange, and I maybe it's just me, but I'm surprised Chicago isn't in the conversation with some of the things that they've done this offseason. I thought they've done a nice job bringing some pieces in. They obviously have a young ascending quarterback and a head coach that led them to a division title and, a playoff win last year. So I'm a little surprised it's Green Bay that we're talking about, not Chicago. I think internally, when I think about it, I think Chicago's the biggest threat to Detroit, getting back to winning a division title, not so much Green Bay. Now, look, Green Bay's a good football team. They've got some good players there, but I just like what Chicago has done, what they're building over there, what Ben's building. Me personally, I look at Chicago as a bigger threat than I do Green Bay.
What say you, G? As far as who's the threat in the division, we'll forget the rest of the NFC and the Super Bowl. Let's just stay in the division. Who do you think is the bigger threat?
I mean, Tim's got it. I think Chicago is that guy. I mean, obviously Ben going over and Caleb's been playing great, and Caleb's going to get better and better and better. I mean, he's a talented guy, and they got pieces around him. I'd be interested to see how Minnesota shakes back though. They got Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
Um, we know what he can do from a quarterback standpoint. I mean, he can have some real weapons around him with Justin Jefferson and the guys. I'd be interested to see, how he rejuvenates that offense. And so I still think it's going to be tough for the Lions to come out of the North. Chicago seems to be getting better. Minnesota's making moves to get better. And the Lions, I'm not going to discredit and say that they're not making moves to get better. It's just, sometimes we want to see the sexy picks, right? I remember a few years ago, back when I was playing, Dallas Cowboys went through several years where they were drafting O-linemen in the first round, and everybody was giving them grief. And then all of a sudden, they had the best O-line in the NFL, and what's the guy name? Murray, the running back. What his name was?
Yeah, you're on it. D'Amico, no.
DeMarco Murray.
Yeah, I was close.
Yeah. DeMarco Murray was leading the league in rushing, and
Right.
Ezekiel Elliott and so it's kind of like sometimes the sexy picks, they're exciting for the fans, but the substance picks is what we need. So I'm leaning on that with the Lions. That hey, we're not making a lot of sexy moves that everybody know about, but the substance is there, and we got enough, sexy players or superstar players, and we'll leave it at that. But I think it's gonna be a good division next year. And at this point, I think every team is gonna be strong, and I really don't know who's gonna come out at this point because I think this team right now, I could see them having three teams that are competing for the playoffs. I can see it. I mean, Chicago is gonna still be there. Minnesota's probably gonna get better. They're gonna be better. And Green Bay is Green Bay, and Detroit's gonna be Detroit. So I think it's gonna be a tough division for sure.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's 4 teams that are competing for a playoff spot, or at least
I
in
love
the
it.
mix there at the the end of the season.
Yeah.
And just to Glover's point about Dallas too, right? It wasn't sexy when you drafted Taylor Decker in 2016, right?
Right.
Or when you drafted Frank Ragnow, right? A couple years later, and then when you get that guy Penei Sewell, right? I mean, he was all right, but what was the precipice to 2023 and 24? It was that offensive line.
Offensive
And so
line.
that to Glover's point, right? So it might not be sexy taking a tackle right now this year at 17, right? But that might be just what you need. That might be that guy with Cade Mays. And if Tate Ratledge takes the next step, and with Penei doing what Penei does, and you can get back to running the football and protecting the quarterback and allowing him to step up with all the weapons that we've talked about, then I think you can get back to 2023 and 2024, really quick. So to Glover's point, they've got to hit this draft, and I think if they come away with a tackle and an edge rusher early in this draft, I think that's 2 spots that you can go a long way into helping this football team and being ready to maybe start doing this that Glover talked about in 2026.
Well, that's a month down the road, and hopefully we'll have some sexiness to talk about at that time. Before we wrap up this show, GQ, you got a message or anything you want to leave with the fans?
No, man, like I say, man, this is a great time of the year. It's exciting. It's also gut-wrenching, nerve-wracking. You see great things going on and you wonder what your team is doing. But like I said last week, you have to just trust the head coach and the general manager that they're doing the best things for the team. And sit back, grab you a glass of whiskey, and just watch it unfold, man. That's all you can do at this point. Don't get your blood pressure up too high, man. Just sit back, relax, and watch it unfold.
Well, words to the wise right there from Glover Quin. To my man, Tim Twentyman, dropping all kinds of knowledge on this edition of Believe in Lions. We thank you, Guy, for hanging out with us and sharing your knowledge and insights and inside info as you continue to cover the Lions like no one's business here. GQ, appreciate you as always. And everybody out there, appreciate you listening. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe, be sure to share and enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Believe in Lions, brought to you by FanDuel. We'll see you again soon.